I remember Frank Zagroni when Bush was campaigning. Frank goes, that guy, man, he eats his mother. Especially, some people respond that way. But Frank's an old POB, a literate person, print-oriented bastard. And so he'd be really irritated by a kinetic liberatory who's really Chinese. That's why we have a great relationship with China. Here's an interesting thing McLuhan said about China in the 60s. He said China was the hidden ground of all the things that were going on in the 60s because that was the most tactile culture. It's Asian, and it was the most Paleolithic compared to industrial. Very primitive society. Not in historic, but in terms of industry. It was the most backward of the communist bloc. So Stuart Brand or somebody came up with the phrase in the 60s upside down. So what becomes, if the 60s, if China's the ground, then China becomes a figure in the 90s. And it resonates through all the culture. Everybody's worried Clinton had Chinese spies in the White House. He was working with Chinese people. And China becomes the future for industry. And Kissinger spends all the 90s running over to China. So China becomes bigger when you reconvert, tip over the 60s. Now how was that done? I'm miming George Bush. I don't expect people to match what I'm saying, other than little glimmerings, and it doesn't matter that you match because whatever I'm saying is just a verbal medium and very puny compared to the mixed media that's swarming around us now and inside us. All that media story, the 200 images is happening inside us. So, most of you haven't read Finnegans Wake, I imagine, right? Nobody knows? Well, take a look at it. You can't read the book. You can't read it. There's not one complete anything in there. But there are fragments, and you can read for a few seconds and pretend you've seen something. But Joyce even frustrates that. He puts 60 to 100 languages in there on one page. So you look for English in there. Okay, you don't know Finnegans Wake, but you have to do your homework eventually and understand that McLuhan spent his life, when he was writing books, redoing Finnegans Wake. Okay? He was redoing the method. But he had the advantage of later, of being at the end of technological evolution with the TV computer and satellite, and you look back and you see Joyce was a reflex responding to radio in the wrestling world. So then he could say, well, I'm not going to talk about the cultural products of radio, study the cultural products. I'm going to study the sensibility of radio and how it formed Cubism and all the arts in different cultures with their particular bias and the general bias of art as a category in Western culture. So he looked at the medium cut. So people run around worrying about Big Brother conditioning us. McLuhan could see that the Big Brother top-down conditioning was happening in media. But it was something that people naturally swam in because you create a new environment. People are going to swim in it because they're going to learn from it. So that's why he said Orwell described 1900. At best, 1934. So McLuhan said he was going to create a distraction on the sidelines to distract the triggermen. That would be the assassins, the Big Brother guys. And what's the rest of it? Give me like the somnambulist. To wake up the somnambulist. So, distract the bureaucrats, and yet the population swimming around the TV computer environment, he's going to try to wake them up. So he had two media he had to work at. That's why Don Field thinks he was schizophrenic. Don doesn't realize he wasn't schizophrenic. He was just operating with many audiences. And you have to put on a different medium, a different approach. That's formal causality, studying the audience, figure out how you want to shape the audience, how you want to respond to their bias. Formal causality was his principle, so he would be different people in relation to different media. So, when you're writing a book, he knows books are dead as a medium that's shaping people, but he always said the best book was Finnegans Wake. So I'm going to explain Finnegans Wake and update it. So, I've written an essay where it's called Literary/Aesthetic Cliche Probes in the American Classroom Without Walls. McLuhan's favorite word for the TV world was classroom without walls. American culture, which contains all the media. America produced a lot of these media and cultural content, so they're the content of the global classroom. So how would you write a book? What would book culture produce after McLuhan? So McLuhan dies in 1980.
If people need the Beatles so much, all they have to do is to buy each album and make a track out of it. Instead of having the White Album or Abbey Road, we make an album by having to fit it into some kind of format and put it on tape, track by track, you know, and it's far better music, and that's why it caused trouble, because otherwise the music is just the same, only on separate albums.